If you haven't seen Werner Herzog's movie Fitzcarraldo, I don't know if you need to, but it's worth knowing what it's about. It's the early 20th century, and there's this opera-loving Irishman, Fitzcarraldo, in Peru. Unfortunately for him, there's no opera house in his town, so he decides to build one. But building an opera house is expensive, so he comes up with a plan that involves an out-of-the-way rubber plantation in the Andean mountains. For complicated reasons, the plan's success depends on Fitzcarraldo and his team lugging a 320-ton steamship over a mountain. That's the bulk of the movie, trying to pull a ship over a mountain by hand. Anyway, I was just thinking about that. This is Interstates. I'm Alex Chambers, and this episode isn't about opera or movies. It's about electoral politics, because Election Day is around the corner. We're going to be choosing candidates for offices from the president to the county coroner. And a lot of those offices are going to be sitting uncontested on the ballots. Only one person running. So many of those. And, interestingly, the races that aren't being contested, they're not split evenly between the parties. In 2022, Republicans let 14.5% of races go unopposed. Democrats? 51%. There were so many more Republicans running unchallenged than Dems. In this election cycle, here in Indiana, people have been trying to change that. That means Democrats running in solidly Republican districts, a lot of them rural. It seems like for most of those rural Democrats, getting into office is going to be a heavy lift. And I wanted to know what would motivate people when the odds are so stacked against them. Are they as crazy as Fitzcarraldo? Luckily, just down the hall, there were a couple reporters who'd been looking into it. So I brought them into the studio to ask them a question.
Why would you try to run for office in rural Indiana as a Democrat in 2024?
Ooh, that's a good one.
That's the question we're going to try to answer after this.
We should probably start with each of you guys introducing yourselves.
Sure. My name is Ethan Sandweiss. I'm a reporter here at WFIU, and I did a little bit of reporting a couple weeks ago on Democrats who are running for state house positions in these really rural districts in Indiana, places that are 79, 80% Republican.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's really high.
And I'm here. I'm Clayton Baumgarth. I'm also a reporter here at WFIU, typically the rural affairs reporter, but Ethan went ahead and took point on this one.
Great. Okay. Ethan, do you want to set the scene?
Sure. So to find some of these people, right, we had to meet them where they're at. So I went out with our videographer, Devin, to Washington, Indiana, which is in the middle of Daviess County.
And where is Daviess County?
Daviess County is a little bit, it's southwest of Bloomington. So it's kind of between Bloomington and Terre Haute. It's very, very rural. Lots of like forested hills, farmland, stuff like that. And Washington, Indiana is this small, very historic-looking town in the middle of the county. It's like a pretty nice place. It's quiet. And we went there at around 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning to meet Ron Critchlow.
I'm the county chairman of Daviess County Democrats.
Who's the chairman of the Daviess County Republican Party. The Daviess County Democratic Party.
It makes sense that you said Republican Party at first because
right.
It's hard to find Democrats in these places.
Yeah, it's extremely hard. And he knows it. He'd be the first person to admit it.
Jesus Christ would not have a chance in Daviess County if he's a Democrat. That's how bad it is. No.
So anyway, we went to the Eagles Lodge because that's where he wanted to meet. That's where he hangs out and spends his time.
So for someone who hasn't been to an Eagles Lodge like me, what's it like? What's it look like? What's it feel like?
It's a place where basically mostly older folks can hang out with their buddies. They can get a drink, play bingo. There's a big meeting hall area at the front, and in the back there's a bar with a jukebox, dartboard. They're having various fundraisers, things like that.
Imagine like a dive bar with a membership. And that's exactly it. Typically, these are some of the last places you're allowed to smoke inside. You know, it's a very unique atmosphere. I used to go to these places all the time in Missouri when I was a kid. My parents would take me there. So I know exactly what this is like when Ethan describes it.
Picture this. It's kind of like a church basement, but they have ashtrays.
Yeah. So you meet him there at the Eagles Lodge.
That's right. And he's sitting there with his friends. He tells me they're basically all Republicans. And even though he's organizing there in Daviess County, he's trying not to talk politics with them because he thinks talking with them about the election is basically a losing gambit. He's not going to convince them, and he knows that.
These are all my friends. I don't get mad at them. I get upset sometimes, when they start arguing, but, that's just facts of life.
But he still thinks he has a chance at one day helping the Daviess County's Dems win elections.
And so what's Ron like?
Yeah, Ron is, he's been around a long time. He was a newspaper editor in Washington. He went to IU way back 60s or 70s, 60s, I think. So, he's college educated. A lot of folks, he says, who have more college experience have left Daviess County, searching for better paying jobs elsewhere, which he says is one of the reasons why the county's so red is because a lot of the kids of his neighbors who have gone to college and gotten that kind of exposure to maybe what you might consider more liberal politics have then moved on.
And what's kept him there?
That's a good question. I get the feeling that he really cares about where he is. Like I said, he's been the newspaper editor there for a long time, so he's got deep roots. His kids don't live there, but he's from around there, grew up around Daviess County, also around near Kentucky. So he's, from southern Indiana. When you're talking with him, you're definitely talking with a Hoosier, right? I mean, you don't get the sense that, this is a Bloomington Democrat who's, descended on this small town and is, just doesn't fit in. It's Ron's one of the guys.
Okay.
And he's also a Dem. Yeah, it does, like I said, it doesn't really come out until you start talking politics with him. And then he's pretty clear about what he believes.
And does he really fits in. How aware are people of him being a Dem? And do they give him flack about it or?
I think it's complicated. He tells me that these folks are his friends, but then he also tells me these anecdotes he went to a funeral of one of his friends not too long ago who was a Republican. And apparently somebody else he knew at the funeral came up to him and said, "Oh, what's a good Democrat like you doing at a Republican's funeral?" And made him really mad, he said. If you are from, I guess, a minority political viewpoint in either of these locations, it's you are going to be crossing over like that. And when people kind of remind you of that separation, it can be really alienating.
Yeah, it seems really unpleasant.
Especially when you are a local and this place is a huge part of your identity.
Totally. You're actually really involved in the community.
Of course. Yeah, you care about this place. And they care about this place too, just in a different way. They think different things are good for it.
Right.
I think it's important that I add that Ron has been trying to get people to run for county positions as Democrats. And he just cannot find people. He's telling me he's extremely frustrating. Not because he doesn't know Democrats, but because the Democrats he's talking to just don't have any hope that they're going to win.
And the excuse that I get is, why run when I just get embarrassed?
Which is funny because Washington, Indiana has had consistently, not constantly, but fairly consistently elects Democratic mayors. So, and he says, back in the 90s, Daviess County did regularly elect some Democrats to county positions.
Always had a county commissioner. We always had county councilmen. We've had auditors, treasurers, assessors.
So it's gotten more red, but he still sounds frustrated, and he's getting older, and he has to pass on leadership to the party, and it sounds like there's a lack of people stepping up to fill that role.
And that's partly because it feels like the only point of running a campaign is to win, which I think maybe it's actually a little more complicated than that.
Yeah. If you're a Democrat running in one of these places, you kind of have to change the parameters for what you consider a victory, right? A victory is not just an electoral victory. A victory is building some kind of groundwork. It's organizing. It's trying to talk to people and trying to convince people that there is another way to vote. So one of these candidates who I talked to in one of these really rural areas around Muncie is a guy named John E. Bartlett. There's more than one John Bartlett running right now for Indiana State House seats, so it's important that I mention he's John E. Bartlett. But, when I talked to him, he was pretty honest about what he thought his chances were there.
I will be ecstatic if I take back some more percentage points. I would be over the top happy if I win and I can go to the State House and change some things.
Yeah, in the last election, because he ran in his district before, he pulled around 30% of the vote against his Republican opponent. And he says that's about 6% better than he did the year before that. So,
all right.
And Bartlett, when he describes why he's a Democrat as opposed to his neighbors who kind of grew up around him, he comes from a union household, and he says that was very important for shaping his perspective. Clayton, have you encountered more of these folks who maybe live in a rural area, but they work in an industrial setting and have this kind of union background?
Yeah, actually, you're talking about my dad. He's a crane operator, and he's been in the union his whole life. So that was something I experienced a lot growing up. Was in the rare event that I would talk about politics with friends, it would always come up about unions and union busting and stuff. And it's like, look, I grew up in a union house. There's nothing I can say because that kind of gave us our livelihood, right? So
right.
It's a little more common than you might think.
And did that mean that you also grew up in a household that was maybe leaned a little bit more Democrat than some of the
yes,
ones around you?
Which again, if you looked at our neighbors, if you talked to any of the friends that my parents kept, my brother kept, that I kept at times, they were not, they're definitely Republican, right?
Yeah.
And even my dad, to this day, who still works, and he goes into these oil refineries and he talks with his coworkers, and it's all the classic Trump rhetoric and classic Republican-leaning stances, and he's like, I can't, I work in a union, these guys give me my job. There's no way I could ever not vote for that.
Right. Okay. So that's one of the ways that in the rural areas that actually adds some complexity to the to what is generally a sea of red.
Right. People forget too that. Indiana, a greater percentage of the Indiana workforce is in manufacturing than almost any other state. Even though this is a really rural red place, manufacturing and labor is a really huge part of Indiana.
So Bartlett is running for John E. Bartlett.
Yes.
Is running for what again?
He's running for State House.
State House. Okay.
Yes.
And is he feeling somewhat optimistic?
He is feeling optimistic that he's going to win more voters than he did last time.
Okay.
I did not get the impression from him, speaking with him, that he expected to win the election, but I also got the impression from him that he would not be running if he didn't think there was a chance of winning. I think all these candidates see a path to victory. I just don't know if they see it in this election or even the next election.
Oh, very interesting.
It's
They're
a
playing
long
the long
game. Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Well, and especially as things like women's rights issues, current Harris campaign, as those have cropped up, I'm sure that's also kind of given him a little fuel for his fire.
Absolutely. I think every Democratic candidate, plus Ron Critchlow, who I talked to, said that they feel that abortion rights, which, as you probably know, Indiana passed a near total abortion ban after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Democrats are hopeful that women are going to turn out and vote for them as a response to that. And they're also hopeful that there's a lot of women who might ordinarily be straight ticket Republican voters who may not be wearing it on their sleeve, but they are going to vote for Democrats at least at the state or local level in the fall.
So Bartlett is one of those people who's feeling hopeful about that. If they're going to be voting for those at the local level, possibly voting for Democrats, breaking with their party, this kind of gets us to another issue that's been going on for people who might want to be running as Democrats in rural areas, in red areas, which is straight ticket voting. Can you tell us about that and how that's an issue?
Definitely.
How it plays out?
Indiana is one of gosh, I'm trying to remember how many it is, but it's one of the few states that allows you to check all of your candidates just by marking a single box, Democrat or Republican. Functionally, what this does is if you lean towards a particular party, it makes it a lot more likely that you're going to select all the candidates from that party, makes it a whole lot harder for Democrats in rural areas, or for that matter, Republicans in urban areas, to win these elections, because even if they run a really strong campaign, a lot of voters are just going to go in and be like, oh, this party represents my values, I'll check this box. And that's what these rural Democrats are really trying to challenge. They're not trying to convert people to being Democrats for the most part. They're not even really trying to convince people not to vote for Donald Trump, for example. They just want people to vote for Democrats at some level.
Right.
So I talked to Paul Helmke. He's a civics professor at IU. He also used to be the Republican mayor of Fort Wayne in Indiana. He's an expert on Indiana electoral politics.
Okay.
And he says that if you can run these successful Democratic campaigns at the local level, there's a chance that people are not going to vote straight ticket, and they might break with the party on these higher seats as well.
And it's hard. And this is one of the reasons that they lose, too. If you don't run somebody for county commissioner or for state rep or for the local offices, then it's going to be harder to get folks out for president or governor and senator.
Oh, interesting. So actually running like at the local level means that it's a potential strategy even to affect national races.
Exactly. So there may be, for example, a Republican voter who's like, I really like Mike Braun. I want him for governor, but I hate my Republican state house rep. I don't particularly care for Donald Trump. So I'm going to vote for Harris for president, and I'm going to vote for this Democrat for the state house, and I'm still going to cast a Republican vote for governor.
Right. But the ease of straight ticket voting makes that less likely.
Exactly.
We checked. Only 7 states allow straight ticket voting. We're going to take a break. When we come back, the rural Democrats have to figure out how to connect with rural voters. They've got some ideas.
I really believe that there are many ways we can express our love. And one of the ways to express the love is through food. In India, that's what we believe.
Is food your love language? Join us each week on Earth Eats for conversations and stories about food and farming and love. Listen Saturday mornings at 7 and Sundays at 1 p.m. on WFIU or anytime as a podcast.
One of the outcomes the rural Democrats are hoping for is that being in the races will help them break up some of the straight ticket votes in their district, including on races other than their own. But to do that, they do have to convince people to vote for them. And the rural Democrats generally aren't talking about national issues.
I think with rural Democrats, you tend to see generally more conservative policies, like regarding the border and stuff like that.
Sure.
Not necessarily, but that's not the issues that they're campaigning on. They're campaigning on things like public school consolidation, which has been a big issue in Indiana. This is a state that has been moving towards providing vouchers so that people can get money from the state to send their kids to a private school. And this might appeal to some urban voters or suburban voters who have more options for private schools that they can send their kids to. But if you're looking at these really rural areas, like where Bartlett's running or in Davies County, like they don't really have that many options for private schools. So a lot of voters there see this as a way to just take money away from rural schools, and they aren't happy about it.
Yeah. And so is Bartlett talking about this?
Bartlett's talking about it. Pretty much everyone's talking about it. I think it's important to note that the candidate for governor for the Democrats in Indiana, Jennifer McCormick, is herself a former teacher. Her running mate, Terry Gooden is also a former teacher and a farmer.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah. All these former teachers.
Exactly. In fact, one of the other candidates I talked to, Trish Whitcomb, who's running against Jim Lucas, who's one of the more, I guess, well-known Indiana state reps for some of the controversy surrounding him. Anyway, Trish Whitcomb is also a former educator, and that's a big part of how she tries to appeal to voters.
The communities take so much pride in their small schools, and the legislators last session said that they were going to put in forced consolidation.
And how is she hoping that's going to help appeal?
Well, she knows that a lot of rural voters really care about their schools, right? Their local schools are not just something that's valuable to the community in terms of providing education, but they're a source of pride. And anything they see as potentially taking resources away from those schools or closing those schools and consolidating them is something that they're going to respond negatively towards.
Yeah. I mean, you just think about like football games, like in a small rural town, like a high school football game. It feels like a really important place for people to be. And thinking about like you pay attention to like how the team is doing and like who's playing and all these different things. And marching band too is so important. And just all these different ways that, well, that's just one way, I guess, the field.
Right. It's a gathering spot.
But it's a real gathering spot.
It's a community gathering moment that happens weekly at a certain time of year.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what she's doing. She's going to houses of Republicans. She's not going to the houses of Democrats. All of her campaigning so far has been at Republicans' houses because she sees an in here. She sees a way to appeal to these voters on something that is very locally specific and very important to them, and she thinks that she can get them to break with the party on this.
And is she getting some response from them, like that this really does matter and they're concerned about this?
Yeah, actually, I had the opportunity to go canvassing with Trish. Well, I didn't go canvassing. I just tagged along as she went
I hope you didn't
canvassing.
Actually go canvassing.
Right.
I did not actually go
You're
canvassing.
You're a reporter here. Come on.
Yes. But yeah, me and Devin, we tagged along in the news van and kind of hung back as the creepers in the van. And she went up to the door and, was charismatic and talked to people. A lot of the people she spoke with were not too keen on having reporters there, so we didn't get to witness all of those conversations. But we did, see her talk to one man, a guy named Barry, who's a former educator who really cared about schools in particular. And so that was what a lot of the conversation was about.
It seems like, I guess that when I hear that she's like canvassing, that's crazy to me. Because it's one thing to do it here in Bloomington, right? To go from door to door, but like in a rural area, houses aren't always really that close together. So she's actually going door to door to all these different places in a rural area.
Oh, yeah. And as she will tell you, that can take a really long time to do.
It takes about 1 hour to go to 5 farms. So it's not like canvassing in an urban area.
It's very inefficient.
That's one part of it.
It's not efficient, and keep in mind that even though Whitcomb is running in a rural district, it's still a district that has tens of thousands of people living in it.
Yeah.
I mean, there are towns here, rural Indiana, it doesn't look like, rural Wyoming, right? It's not unpopulated.
Right.
So there's a lot of doors to knock.
But they're far apart.
It takes a long time. And she's having long conversations with voters. These stops that we made, she would be at the door sometimes 10 to 15 minutes having a conversation with this person.
And so if she's maybe convincing 2 of those people to vote for her, and then she has to actually convince how many people for her to win.
Well, don't ask me to do math, Alex. That's not my job.
But we can just imagine. Let's imagine some numbers because there were, maybe others in here like me are English majors.
Yes.
And we can just imagine numbers. We don't have to crunch them. And we can think that the number of hours that it would take to meet that many people and then convince that many people would possibly be more hours than there are in the day.
I mean, certainly. And I'm not exactly sure what the size of her campaign team is.
Right.
I'm sure there are other people canvassing for her, but when we went out, it was just her. And like I mentioned before, even if there are people there who are willing to vote Democrat, there's not a lot of people who are involved in the Democratic Party.
So how's she feeling?
She has a lot more optimism than some of the other candidates I've talked to, even though Jim Lucas, her opponent, won by a landslide in the last election. Trish is really hoping that, first of all, dissatisfaction with one-party rule and maybe dissatisfaction with what I guess might be seen as some of like the sharper edges of his personality might drive more voters over towards her. She's also the daughter of a former Republican governor of Indiana, is hoping that her family's reputation might help her. And, she grew up in Seymour, Indiana. She knows a lot of these people. Some of the people whose doors we went to were her classmates. She was, I don't know if she was classmates with him. She said she was a couple of years behind John Mellencamp in high school. Yeah, so she's got deep roots there, and I think she's hoping that'll help her too.
My dad was a Republican governor and very popular in southern Indiana, and so I think that my name recognition in that way and people knowing my family in that way kind of takes the edge off of that margin. And
so good for her that she's feeling optimistic, even if the odds don't seem great. And canvassing in rural areas is difficult, time-consuming. Is there anything else that people are trying to do to deal with the challenges of getting kind of recognition in rural areas?
Recognition, of course, is a problem. And it's not just that these rural areas tend to lean to the right. It's also that there is a degree of gerrymandering in Indiana. I don't know exactly how much it actually affects general elections, but a lot of the candidates I talked to felt like it disadvantages them in elections. So they're trying to reach across districts and build these connections between them and not so much be in silos of I'm running in this district, I'm running a campaign in this district, but thinking about southern, or not just southern Indiana, but rural Indiana as a whole, thinking about a network of Democrats who are all campaigning together and trying to build a movement and get each other elected. So I went to Martinsville recently where the Indiana Rural Summit was taking place. And this is a meeting that's been going on for a few years.
Okay.
It was started by Michelle Higgs, who is a Democratic candidate for state representative and a community organizer. She's been involved in issues like housing. But she started this summit to try and get these Democratic candidates to meet each other and build some kind of network on the ground and some kind of power structure so that even if she doesn't win this election, they're getting more recognition and they're building more connections.
I'm really not interested in running and then fundraising and doing this all over and killing myself and getting nowhere if I'm not building some kind of power. And I know that power is organized people and organized money.
So all of these things seem like small things that they can do, or big things in terms of the level of effort and the potential. But especially in the short term, it still seems like a serious uphill battle. What do you feel like you got from talking to all these people about why they keep trying to do it?
Well, first of all, these are a lot of people who really believe in their cause. I especially got this picture when I was talking to Ron Critchlow, who, despite saying that he could fit all the Democrats in the northern half of Daviess County on his couch, really does feel like the tides are going to turn, and he thinks it's going to happen soon. But, some of these candidates are seeing some level of traction. Bartlett, too, says that he gets some degree of satisfaction just from knowing he's winning a bigger share of the vote, even if he's still losing by a pretty wide margin.
So over the last several years, it's like we keep losing 5% every election cycle. Last time, I was able to bring back 6% for my race. So I think we've finally gotten to the point where people are going to start clicking another button.
I think a lot of people, as we talked about earlier, see women's issues as something that's really going to affect turnout this year.
Yeah.
They see young voters and minority voters, in rural areas as, probably being more likely to turn out and vote for Democrats.
Now, it may not happen in Daviess County, but it'll break the ice a little bit, We'll get closer.
So this is more about bringing people out of the woodwork who might not necessarily have bothered in the first place.
Yeah. This is not about necessarily convincing people who are confident that Republicans represent their values,
right.
That they agree with Republican policies. They're looking for conservatives, but they're looking for conservatives who are on the fence and might be dissatisfied with the party or just one-party rule in Indiana in general. I mean, the state has been pretty much controlled by a Republican majority for the past 20 years. Wasn't always that way, of course. Indiana has had Democratic governors. It's had Democratic-led state house as recently as 2008 election. Indiana went blue for president. They went blue for 5 of their 9 congressional representatives.
That many? Wow.
Yeah.
In 2008?
In 2008.
Yeah. Which is, in some level, not that long ago.
No, it feels recent to me.
Feels recent. Definitely feels recent to me. So Critchlow, Bartlett, Whitcomb, Higgs, all of them are feeling like they're seeing some potential.
So, like, to answer your question that you brought up in the beginning of why people do what they do, I mean, we're talking these processes take a long time, and it takes a few people to start trying to make something happen. It's not going to happen overnight in these areas. That they're not going to turn blue overnight, and we'll see. But I think it's going to take time, and it's just little bits of progress here and there.
And you see also places like Daviess County, even in elections like 2008, where Democrats do surprisingly well in Indiana, they're still going red. I mean, there are areas that are always going to go Republican probably. So Democrats keep organizing there. But I think they realize that they, just don't share the same beliefs as their neighbors, and that's probably not going to change for a long time.
Awesome. Ethan, thanks for going out and doing this reporting. Really good to hear all this.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex.
Clayton, thank you for helping set this up and help us thinking through all this too.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.
And good to hear about what the Eagles Lodge was like as a kid.
Do you have an Interstates theme song?
I do, actually. Yeah. Amy Olsner wrote it.
Ooh, Amy O?
Yeah.
Oh,
Amy
nice.
O. Yeah. So just got to listen to the whole episode. It only plays at the end.
Okay.
It feels like a landing place, not so much like, here we go.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, but yeah, I do have an Interstates theme song. So that's coming in right now.
And that's our show. We'd love to hear what it made you think about. Send us an email or a voice memo through the contact tab on our website, wfiu.org/interstates, or get in touch on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, tell a friend about it. And to really make it sink in, you should probably tell them what you were doing while you listened. Like when you were helping your son get ready for Halloween and he was all set to be a vampire corporate CEO, complete with blood dripping down his front, and you'd followed a recipe you found online for fake blood, but when you poured it over his white shirt and tie, it somehow came out more blue than red, and your kid got mad, and you panicked a little, but in rereading the directions, it said you have to wait a while, and you decided it was time for you to step away, let your kid's dad take a turn, and you sat back to listen to the latest Interstates, and eventually your partner came out and reported that
it's gotten more red, but he still sounds frustrated.
And you were like, well, let's give it some more time. We all need to learn to play the long game. Like that. Okay, we've got your quick moment of slow radio coming up. But first, the credits. Interstates is produced and edited by me, Alex Chambers. Our associate producers are Dom Hyab and Carl Templeton. Our master of social media is Jillian Blackburn. We get support from Eabon Binder, Natalie Ingalls, Luann Johnson, Sam Schemenauer, Peyton Whaley, Lisa Robin Young, and Kate Young. Our executive producer is Eric Bolstridge. Thanks to Ethan Sandweiss and Clayton Baumgarth, and to Mark Alicia for editorial oversight on this episode. Our theme song is by Amy Olsner and Justin Fulmer. We have additional music from the artists at Universal Production Music. All right, time for some found sound. That was Putting the Trash and Recycling Away, recorded by Birdie Chambers. Thanks, kiddo. Until next week, I'm Alex Chambers. Thanks for listening.